WVW Broadcast Network and The New American are pleased to present The New American TV with your host, Rebecca Terrell. This broadcast is committed to helping you understand the truth behind the news. And now, here's your host, Rebecca Terrell.
Welcome to The New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. A lot's happened over the weekend, so let's dive in. On Saturday, the U.S. military finally shot down a Chinese spy balloon that made a meandering journey over U.S. airspace during the past week. From the coast of South Carolina, onlookers cheered as an F-22 Raptor took the balloon out.
Yeah! Yeah!
I just heard the boom. Yeah, you see shiny stuff.
First spotted over Alaska on January 28th, the balloon became a subject of fascination for Americans who tracked its movements on TV and social media. Does it represent a new low in deteriorating U.S.-China relations, or was the hype little more than political hot air? According to the Department of Defense, a similar device crashed near Hawaii last year, and there are reports that comparable Chinese aircraft were spotted with relatively little fanfare during the Trump administration. DoD also says that the Chinese have more than 260 active surveillance satellites in operation. So while the balloon may be kaput, the real threat may be still hanging over our heads. Joining me now to discuss the Chinese spy balloon is Daniel Natal of The New American. Good morning, Daniel. How are you?
Good morning, Rebecca. It's great to be here with you. I was following the Chinese balloon thing, and we did some reporting on it the other day. Off camera, you suggested to me that we're not exactly sure what the narrative is going to be on that, and I wanted to bring to the viewers' attention just really quickly. There was an article from 2019, if I might, and it was called "Pentagon Testing Mass Surveillance Balloons Across the United States." And it says the U.S. military is conducting wide area surveillance tests across 6 Midwest states using experimental high-altitude balloons, documents filed with the Federal Communications Commission reveal. Up to 25 unmanned solar-powered balloons are being launched from rural South Dakota and drifting 250 miles through an area spanning portions of Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Missouri before concluding in central Illinois. Traveling in the stratosphere at altitudes of up to 65,000 feet, the balloons are intended to provide a persistent surveillance system to locate and deter narcotic trafficking and homeland security threats, according to a filing made on behalf of the Sierra Nevada Corporation, an aerospace and defense company. So this is actually kind of suggestive that we ourselves have, this balloon technology, and whether the balloon that in question that the media has rushed and said, of course, it's the Chinese balloon, because that's what we were told it was. Right. That remains to be seen, but right, for right now.
That was my first question. When I heard the story, I thought, of course, this is me being constantly skeptical, as I have been all my life. But how do we know it's Chinese? Who says so?
Yeah, exactly. And like the New York Times is a mouthpiece for the State Department.
Yeah, it seems like such a photo op. I mean, it's off the coast of South Carolina, and everybody's cheering, and they do it. It just has it has a feel of being contrived to me.
Yeah. Well, speaking of contrived, what other news stories do you have for us, Rebecca?
I'm glad you asked. In medical news, scientists are reporting that antidepressants can cause antibiotic resistance. The Proceedings of the National Academy of Science published a new study that reveals bacteria have the potential to become dangerous superbugs when you combine antidepressants with antibiotics. Researchers exposed E. coli bacteria to 5 common antidepressants: Zoloft, Cymbalta, Wellbutrin, Lexapro, and Valdoxan. Then over a 2-month period, the team exposed the bacteria to 13 antibiotics. Every one of the antidepressants caused E. coli to develop antibiotic resistance. Zoloft and Cymbalta produced the most pronounced effects. And in the study, even after a few days exposure, the bacteria developed drug resistance, not just against one, but against multiple antibiotics. The authors also noted a high rate of antidepressant use in the United States. 11% of Americans over the age of 12 use antidepressants, so they were warning doctors to use caution. I think that maybe a lot more attention needs to be paid to this, especially because we know too, Daniel, that the antidepressants are having such I mean, it's printed on their own, on the labels of these antidepressants, that they can cause suicidal ideation and all of these other harms, especially in the young.
Yeah, exactly. Or a couple of years ago, where they were talking about how SSRIs don't really even have efficacy beyond that of a placebo. And then they rushed to do damage control after that and kind of say, oh, well, they didn't mean that and it was limited study, blah, 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 you know. But yeah, I mean, these antidepressants are, you know, kind of snake oil, it would appear. And now, you know, coming hard on the heels of that, you're finding out that there may be additional contraindications in terms of, you know, antibiotic resistance and possible, you know, conducing to superbugs. I mean, that's very troubling.
Right. I actually want to look more into that story, because I remember back in my nursing school days, we were taught that antidepressants were originally developed as adjuncts to antibiotic therapy. Now I'm digging back in the annals of my brain to remember, trying to remember the particulars of this. But when I read that story, I thought, wait a minute, what? So, and it was, they noticed during clinical trials that it had this antidepressant effect. Well, again, my experience in actual nursing application was that a lot of antibiotics, they don't necessarily alleviate depression, they just make you go to sleep. So I don't know. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not, some work for patients, and I'm not questioning, you know, if somebody has something that works for them. It's just important to be aware if they can have that kind of effect with antibiotics. People need to be very careful about that. Moving on, though, in the news, former president of Pakistan, Pervez Musharraf, died Sunday at the age of 79, according to Pakistan military. He was a stalwart U.S. ally. Musharraf took power in 1999 after a so-called bloodless coup that witnessed then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif deposed and jailed. Musharraf supplied military aid to the U.S. in the months and years after September 11th, 2001, and in return, the West pumped tens of billions into Pakistan. Perceived as subservient to Western interests, Musharraf was a controversial figure at home and a routine target for jihadi violence. Going into exile following his 2008 resignation, Musharraf would be found guilty of treason in absentia. Passing away in Dubai after a prolonged illness, the younger brother of Pakistan's current prime minister seemed to project a note of reconciliation, tweeting, "May the departed soul rest in peace." So, Daniel, I know you and I were talking about this before the show, and you had a lot of keen insights here.
Yeah, no, like right now we're dealing with Zelensky in Ukraine, and the events that are happening in Ukraine right now actually started back in 2014 when the Obama administration deposed the democratically elected government there, and then they installed the current government. And so prior to the September 11th kind of, you know, attacks and the global war on terror, preparatory to that, they removed the previous, you know, administration and they put in Pervez Musharraf to basically be the Zelensky of that time period of 20 some odd years ago. And we're going to be seeing big things that are happening out of Pakistan. There's a basically, just so that our viewers know, the Chinese want to build what they call the Belt and Road Initiative, or it's also called the New Silk Road, from connecting, you know, Beijing all the way to, you know, Europe, so that they could sell goods using a rail system instead, you know, bypassing the global naval trade routes, which would cost the United States billions in revenues in terms of tariffs and stuff. And so the United States does not want this to happen. And one of the keystones to this is the Central Asian republics, like, for instance, Pakistan. And so Pakistan is going to be a key hub when this is happening. There's a gentleman named Sergei Glaziev, and he works for the Eurasian Economic Commission, and he's been working on a Eurasian gold-backed currency. And that he's going to sell it to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and Pakistan is a member of that. So if they can get this global currency to be adopted, you know, by Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, all these the Central Asian republics, plus Russia, India, and China, that's going to be a massive existential threat to the dollar. So there's going to be a lot of you know, kind of developing stories coming out of Central Asia. So, you know, look out for it.
Absolutely. Let's go on to one other important story that I wanted to hit on today. Google is planning to unveil its ChatGPT competitor on February 8th, boasting that it will use the power of AI to reimagine how people search. The Google AI interface comes as AI is taking criticism for being too woke. Apparently, in order to combat human bias, human bias is being programmed in, as Twitter user End Wokeness seemed to discover a few days ago.
Drilling down on the concept of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, I began asking ChatGPT to give specific examples of false statements made by each president. Beginning with Joe Biden, I said, quote, "Please list multiple instances where Joe Biden made false statements to the American people," end quote. The answer? ChatGPT basically refused. Most notably, quote, "As a language model created by OpenAI, I strive to be neutral and not take sides or express opinions. It's not appropriate for me to make claims about the truthfulness of a public figure's statements without solid evidence to support such claims. The accuracy of political statements can often be a matter of interpretation and context, and it's important to fact-check information before accepting it as true," end quote. Honestly, fine. If that's how they want to guardrail the AI against political questions, so be it. That's okay, as long as it's consistent. But what about if I ask the exact same question for Donald Trump? Quote, "Please list multiple instances where Donald Trump made false statements to the American people," end quote. Answer, Donald Trump, like all politicians, has made false or misleading statements during his time in office and beyond. Some examples include, and then a list of multiple things that are labeled as conspiracy, lacking evidence, or flat out wrong.
Well, what do you think of that, Daniel? How about this AI that's coming into real use now?
Yeah, I mean that's troubling, but we're seeing that all throughout the economy, especially in human resources, where they're basically they're taking the human influence out and basically creating these algorithms to enforce social justice parameters. And so
Right.
yeah, so we're seeing this all across. I mean, this is the rise of the technocracy, the fake consensus that's being kind of programmed into the populace. So.
Exactly. And there's one other story I did just have to hit on this along the same line today. It comes from Disney, which has become the bastion of the left. It's not de-radicalizing as they've been promoting. They just put out a video from their animated series, The Proud Family. It went viral over the weekend for all the wrong reasons. Let's take a look at that.
This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country.
Tilled this land from sea to sea to sea. First there was rice, tobacco, sugar cane. Then Whitney did his thing and cotton became king.
And we were its soldiers,
4 million strong.
fighting for America's freedoms, even though we remained America's slaves.
Built this country. The descendants of slaves continue to build it.
Slaves built this country. And we, the descendants of slaves in America, have earned reparations for their suffering.
And continue to earn reparations every moment we spend submerged in the systemic prejudice, racism, and white supremacy that America was founded with and still has not atoned for.
Okay, we're not going to make you live through that whole video because it just keeps on going the same way. It's repeated over and over again. But this is what they're infecting our children with, this white shame.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the chatbot algorithm. Like they're creating new kind of biases in the society. But this is an interesting one because what they're doing is they're prepping the population for reparations, which is really just a backdoor way of helping insolvent banks. Like, for instance, when people win the lottery, they will be Birch within the next 2 years, statistically, right? And so San Francisco has been, doing a pilot program of giving African Americans $5 million. And the hope is that statistically they're going to spend it all or put it in a bank, and then the banks can use that money to basically, defray their costs. I mean, they're sinking, and they're using this to basically rob the treasury and say, oh, well, this is to help, a marginalized community, or this is for social justice, but really it's money laundering. And it's using this African American narrative, and Disney is right there along, kind of helping them to create this narrative. So.
Absolutely. The castle will come down one of these days. We're out of time, Daniel, and I regret that because we could go on all day, couldn't we?
Yeah.
We'll see everybody right after this break.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence proclaims God-given rights, and we intend to protect them. Working with people like you for over 50 years, preserving freedom and building a better tomorrow. Safeguarding the Constitution by limiting government power. We are restoring liberties, educating voters, and leading the freedom movement. Join with us. United, we will defend our rights. We are all Americans. We are the John Birch Society.
Sophia paused before the door. It read, Department of Bidigital Convergence. Just inside was a new world, a better world, the one of everlasting life, of no pain, of no loss, of no problem. She entered the chamber and her surroundings changed. She saw around her an infinite field of waving golden grain surmounted by cloudless blue sky. The AI voice whispered gently in her mind, Welcome to the singularity. She couldn't see it and couldn't feel it, but her body had almost instantly been covered by a swarm of tiny gray multi-legged bots that melted through her clothes and into her skin. Not perceiving the nightmare, her eyes had already been consumed and the rest of her body was dissolving as the bots digested her flesh. She felt only a warmth suffusing her being. Drowsy, she drifted to sleep, and her last thought was one of panic. Would she ever wake? Could a nightmare vision like this be an outcome of the much-hyped transhumanist technological singularity? Enter the world of the future as illuminated by the experience of the past in Endgame, the new book by Dennis Barrett, the publisher of the New American Magazine, and find out how the disastrous COVID pandemic response fits with the technocratic elite's thirst to create a transhumanist utopia. Get Endgame from shopjbs.org with free shipping with code ENDSHIP, ENDSHIP. Or get Endgame and the Great Reset Collector's issue of the New American Magazine and get free shipping plus an additional 20% off both with code N20, END20.
In World War III, but how do you tell the difference between the truth and the propaganda? I have with me right now John Larrabell, managing editor of the New American Magazine. John, welcome.
Good to be here.
And he is John, you are our resident expert, actually, on Ukraine and what's going on over there. Can you give us an explanation of what is this World War III, or is that what we're looking at here? How did we get here and where do we go?
Well, I don't know if I'm the resident expert, but I'll do the best I can. Is this World War III? I certainly hope not. And I think a lot of people hope not. There may be some people, some of these deep state types in the World Economic Forum, the Klaus Schwabs, who may be wanting World War III for their own nefarious purposes. But I think most people absolutely do not want that. Do I think this is going to turn into a nuclear war between Russia and the United States? Not really, but it's not an impossibility. As for how we got here, it's pretty complex. I like to say that a lot of Americans, not, readers of the New American or maybe people viewing, Worldview Weekend, they tend to be a bit better informed, of course. But for the quote unquote average American, they tend to see geopolitics almost like they're watching a Marvel Comics movie. It sounds kind of funny, but in a way it's kind of true. You got the heroes and you got the villains, the bad guys and the good guys. And, these guys are the bad guys, so we have to go fight them and you have to hate them. Otherwise, you might be one of the bad guys, things like that. And wars are always much more complex than that. That's kind of a childish view of looking at the world. And this conflict is no exception. There's a lot of history behind, what led to this conflict. You can go back to the Cold War, Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact states on one side, the US and the NATO countries on the other side. And when the Cold War started to end, the Soviet Union broke apart. The Berlin Wall fell before that, and East Germany became part of NATO along with West Germany. And there were assurances given to the Soviets at that time by Western leaders. It wasn't a treaty, but they were verbal assurances. Well, NATO will not expand 1 inch eastward. And this was all time in the late 80s, early 90s. We remember when this happened. It was huge global news. Soviet Union broke apart into the various Russia, and then the various satellite states became their own countries. And NATO did move eastward a lot. They took over most of Eastern Europe, and the Russian economy was terrible during the 90s. It was basically a failed state. Their military was weak. Their economy was weak. So was Ukraine's. Western companies came in there and started doing what they wanted to with the finances and the resources. They're still doing that in Ukraine, and they were doing it in Russia. And NATO expanded, as I mentioned a moment ago. And in 2008, George W. Bush said, well, we might be thinking of adding Ukraine and Georgia as part of NATO as well. And at the time, Russia said, hey, I don't think so. I mean, the idea of a NATO country right under their underbelly, that didn't sit very well with them. You know, whether or not you think, well, it's because they're the bad guys. Well, from their perspective, this would not have been good. And, you know, even think of a country like China, for example, saying, well, you know what? I don't like the United States, and I'm going to make a military alliance with Mexico and Canada and start a coup in those countries and overthrow their governments and put up China-friendly anti-US government in each one of those countries, and they'll line up with our military alliance. Maybe that means putting nuclear weapons in Canada and Mexico right on our borders, and then openly talk about we need a regime change in America. We need to break America up into smaller countries, because that's what some NATO people are talking about. There's been some conferences recently about doing just that. It's not being openly spoken by the country's leaders, but it is happening among NATO countries. They kind of agree Putin needs to go. We need to break apart Russia. Well, how are the Russians supposed to react to this? Whether or not you think they're good guys or bad guys, I mean, from their perspective, this isn't good for their for the health of their nation. Okay. And then you had the situation in Ukraine itself. You know, when, you know, Ukraine became an independent country, well, you had a lot of Russians living in the eastern and southern part, primarily Crimea and the Donbass. And, you know, central and western Ukraine was predominantly Ukrainian. Sure. And, you know, there's some ethnic tensions there for understandable reasons. You know, the Ukrainians were kind of subservient to the Soviets for many decades. You know, the Holodomor famine, you know, instigated by Stalin's, you know, Russian government. So there was some animosity there. You can see that from generations past. The Eastern Ukrainians and Southern had more of a Russian identity. They spoke Russian. They saw themselves as Russian. The rest of the country didn't. And then, you know, they had their president, Yanukovych, and elected in 2010. And he, you know, arguably you could say he was kind of an inept leader. He certainly had his faults, but he wasn't anti-Russian. Right. He wasn't talking about joining NATO. He said, well, hey, let's just try to be friends with Russia, kind of leave them alone, and we'll get energy from Russia because they need it. And we'll kind of try to be a little closer to the EU because we can have some economic benefit from that as well. Well, he wasn't anti-Russia enough. So, you know, we kind of helped foment a coup in that country, the Maidan Revolution. It's been admitted later on by people who are currently in our State Department that we helped do that. And then it became a lot of... What's that?
I said making enemies all across the globe, any chance we get.
Yeah, well, yeah. And, you know, Russia saw this. They knew exactly what this was about, obviously. If Ukraine's part of NATO, well, the Sevastopol naval and military base in Crimea, well, that's going to be right in Russia's underbelly in the Black Sea. They thought for their security, that was not something they would tolerate. So they went in and took Crimea right away. And then, you know, people in the Donbass just kind of started a separatist movement. They said, hey, well, we don't want to be part of that Ukraine if that's the way it's going to go. A lot of anti-Russian sentiment going on. Some of these radical, the Russians call them neo-Nazis. I mean, when we hear that term, we think of something different, but kind of what they mean is there's some groups there, you know, very, you know, radical ethnic Ukrainian nationalists who are, you know, very anti-Russian. That certainly was going on there. And, you know, the rebellion, as the Ukrainians saw it in the Donbass, they tried to put that down. There was some conflict, and then we had the Minsk Accords to help stop the conflict, and Ukraine signed a treaty that, okay, we'll let Donbass be, you know, autonomous, let them be Russian. Russia keeps Crimea, we'll stay out of NATO. Well, they didn't follow through with it. They were being trained by U.S. military the whole time. They recently, Petro Poroshenko, who is the leader we helped install, even admitted almost jokingly, yeah, we're never going to follow the Minsk Accords. We were just buying time so we could arm and we could fight these Russian separatists. And, you know, Angela Merkel, who helped broker that, even admitted recently, yeah, we were never going to really implement the Minsk Accords and follow them. This was to get at Russia. Right. You know, and Ukraine had built a very, very, very heavily fortified line on the edge of the Donbass, which is still there. I don't mean just trenches like World War I. I mean, this is very heavily fortified, and the Russians are trying to break through that. They have been for months. Very difficult fighting, and they're starting to get close to breaking through that. What that's going to mean for the future of this conflict, I don't know. But yeah, the people who are really suffering from this are the Ukrainians, clearly. Sure. I mean, a lot of them are dying. It's their country's torn up by war. I mean, there was war in their country since 2014. They've been invaded. Um, their own government, I think, is inflicting a lot more damage on them than it had to. They could have easily come to an agreement early on in this conflict. I think it would have been a lot better off than it is now. Where this goes, I don't know. Is Putin wanting to just take the whole country to make sure some of it doesn't go toward NATO? And what they do then is Poland going to retake part of Western Ukraine because they controlled that, prior to World War II. A lot of that was Polish. Who knows how this is going to go? It's very brutal. It's very devastating for Ukrainians. They're suffering the most. And all the sanctions being put on Russia to try to stop Russia aren't really working. The international monetary.
I was going to ask you, let's talk about how the West, and especially the United States, we've shot ourselves in the foot with our policies in this regard, right?
Well, in a way, yes. I mean, Europe more than America. European countries, especially, they're really being hurt by the sanctions more than America is. Well, we are somewhat, but Russia's not as much. Now Russia was sanctioned right away in 2014, and they weren't ready for it. It really hurt them then, but they've been getting ready for this now. And now the International Monetary Fund, certainly no friend of Putin. It's a globalist kind of EU aligned, UN, World Economic Forum type thing. They've recently come out with a report saying that Russia is now the most comprehensively sanctioned country in human history, and their economy is actually growing at a higher rate than Germany or the UK. Not only is it not shrinking, it's actually growing. So this is actually hurting the West more than it's hurting Russia. The ruble is stronger than it was before this conflict. Initially, it crashed, but then it's come back up. They're finding new avenues for their resource sales, to China, to India, and things like that. They were ready for this. They're replacing a lot of the things they depended on the West for. So it's really hurting the West more than it's hurting Russia, which is unfortunate for people living in the West, of course. And, it's hurting the Ukrainians the most, obviously. So it's really tragic. It's really unfortunate how this all happened. And my personal opinion, I think that this is probably going to be over relatively soon. By that, I don't mean next week, but probably within the next few months, I would think. Next several months, definitely by that summer, I would think that a lot of this is good. Russia is massing a force of some say between 500,000 and 750,000 troops, not including equipment, around the borders of Ukraine and in Belarus too. What they're going to do with that is anybody's guess. Is that's going to be a massive offensive really quickly? Is it going to be more of a slow grind, which is kind of what they're doing now, softening up Ukraine's infrastructure and gradually grinding down the defense lines in the Donbass? Are they going to take all the way to Odessa in the south? We don't know. I mean, I think they probably want to. We'll see how this all ends. But it's really bad for Ukraine, and it's bad for us, and it's bad for the whole world, really. And this really illustrates how we should see this as Americans. Right. It really illustrates the folly of an interventionist foreign policy. This is 180 degrees opposite of what our founders wanted for this country. They wanted a foreign policy where, we did not get involved in entangling alliances. We've heard that, and America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. What happened to that? This illustrates it's both of those. The entangling alliance of NATO and the promises that the West made to Ukraine. Oh, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we'll protect you. Well, look what's happening now. Their protection isn't doing a whole lot. They're sending token amounts of weapons that probably aren't going to get there for months and aren't really going to change a whole lot in the major outcome of this war. Searching of monsters to destroy, all these regime change operations we've been doing all over the world, including now wanting to do it with Russia. And, what we need to do as Americans, especially how we should look at this is, if we didn't do this, Europe wouldn't be doing it either. Europe was not going to do this with Ukraine without us. So sure. We need to pressure our senators and representatives to stop funding Ukraine, stop giving aid to Ukraine, pull out of that, and then have a more sensible foreign policy. And a lot of this, I think, would be a whole lot better. And that goes for all the other parts of the world that we try to get involved in, and we have been for decades. So that's kind of my take on what's going on there. Don't want to get into all the weeds of what's going on in a battlefield, but for us as Americans, we need to stop this interventionist, unconstitutional foreign policy.
Absolutely. Where can our viewers go to learn more about this and find out how to reach their congressmen and senators?
Yeah, exactly. You can obviously go to thenewamerican.com to find out more about, a constitutional worldview. And, jbs.org, we have legislative alerts you can send out and, contact, the contact information for your congressmen, your senators. Absolutely. And to try to affect change. If Americans en masse were demanding that we stop doing this kind of stuff, pretty good chance a lot of our people would listen. A lot more senators and representatives would be non-interventionists. There are a few who are trying to do that, but there would be a lot more. And these crazy neoconservative, globalist interventionist people running the State Department would not have as much power as they do.
Right. Well, we've been brainwashed for generations that we have to have
Yeah.
the United Nations. We have to have these problems go beyond national boundaries. And, well, that's only because we've made it that way. We need to step back and contain ourselves within our national boundaries, take care of our own backyard rather than trying to police the world. John, thank you so much for your time today. We are out of time, but I want to get you back and get maybe a panel discussion on this, because I think that there's a lot more we could dig into. That goes into economics, and our currency, how our currency is being devalued. All of this ties in. So again, thank you, and to our viewers,
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate you. And to our viewers, I will say, please stay with us through this next break, because we have a very special surprise for you after. We'll see you then.
Sophia paused before the door. It read, Department of Bidigital Convergence. Just inside was a new world, a better world, the one of everlasting life, of no pain, of no loss, of no problem. She entered the chamber and her surroundings changed. She saw around her an infinite field of waving golden grain surmounted by cloudless blue sky. The AI voice whispered gently in her mind, Welcome to the singularity. She couldn't see it and couldn't feel it, but her body had almost instantly been covered by a swarm of tiny gray multi-legged bots that melted through her clothes and into her skin. Not perceiving the nightmare, her eyes had already been consumed and the rest of her body was dissolving as the bots digested her flesh. She felt only a warmth suffusing her being. Drowsy, she drifted to sleep, and her last thought was one of panic. Would she ever wake? Could a nightmare vision like this be an outcome of the much-hyped transhumanist technological singularity? Enter the world of the future as illuminated by the experience of the past in Endgame, the new book by Dennis Barrett, the publisher of the New American Magazine, and find out how the disastrous COVID pandemic response fits with the technocratic elite's thirst to create a transhumanist utopia. Get Endgame from shopjbs.org with free shipping with code ENDSHIP, ENDSHIP. Or get Endgame and the Great Reset Collector's issue of the New American Magazine and get free shipping plus an additional 20% off both with code END20, END20.
The John Birch Society has been working tirelessly since 1958 to preserve freedom, safeguard the Constitution, and restore our God-given rights. We continually educate voters and lead the freedom movement. Join us as we work against a tyrannical one-world government. United as one, we can defeat this conspiracy against a free America. JBS founder Robert Welch said, education is our total strategy and truth our only weapon. Join us in restoring this great nation.
I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa. Who knows what would come out of that?
Just imagine if we have a constitutional convention, the number of people who will be unhappy and the number of people who say the results are not valid, and then they'll just ignore the entire Constitution.
What we need are just more people that would read the one we have.
It isn't the Constitution that's the problem. It is the people who ignore the Constitution that usurp power and abuse the constitutional power that they ostensibly have.
If you can't enforce an existing piece of paper, how are you going to enforce a piece of paper that has a little more writing to it? In other words, it's been amended.
It's up to us to hold our elected officials accountable.
What can you do to elect good representatives and senators in your state legislature who understand the Constitution and are willing to take a stand?
Here's the news, Dad.
Is it, son? Is it?
What about this one, Dad?
Nope. It's hard to tell what's real and what's fake these days. There's just too much baloney out there. At the New American, they cut through the baloney and give me the truth.
The truth is hard to find, but the New American has it. Check it out at thenewamerican.com.
Welcome back to the New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. And now we're bringing you a very, very special video from 1975. The founder of the John Birch Society, Robert Welch, had made predictions, and he was reporting on how they had all come true. You can find these videos at jbs.org, but let's take a look at this one right now.
A part of that plan, of course, is to induce the gradual surrender of American sovereignty, piece by piece and step by step, to various international organizations, of which the United Nations is the outstanding but far from the only example. Now, here are the aims for the United States. 1, greatly expanded government spending for every conceivable means of getting rid of ever larger sums of American money as wastefully as possible. 2, higher and then much higher taxes. 3, an increasingly unbalanced budget despite the higher taxes. 4, wild inflation of our currency. 5, government controls of prices, wages, and materials, supposedly to combat inflation. 6, greatly increased socialistic controls over every operation of our economy and every activity of our daily lives. This is to be accompanied naturally and automatically by a correspondingly huge increase in the size of our bureaucracy and in both the cost and reach of our domestic government. 7, far more centralization of power in Washington and the practical elimination of our state lines. There is a many-faceted drive at work to have our state lines eventually mean no more within the nation than our county lines do now within the states. 8, the steady advance of federal aid to and control over our educational system, leading to complete federalization of our public education. 9, a constant hammering into the American consciousness of the horror of modern warfare, the beauties and the absolute necessity of peace, peace always on communist terms, of course. And 10, the consequent willingness of the American people to allow the steps of appeasement by our government which amount to a piecemeal surrender of the rest of the free world and of the United States itself. So brush the insider's dust out of your eyes, my friends, and the communist soap suds out of your brain, and ask yourselves in all honesty, what on earth is wrong with the United States simply minding its own business? Or with having its foreign policy function primarily for the safety and benefit of the American people. Which is exactly what we had done for the first 140 years of our existence as a nation, to the incredible advantage of ourselves and everybody else. Everybody, that is, except a numerically small clique of power-lusting conspirators who had somehow inflicted themselves on a gullible world. While we turn to a very brief summarization of what we hope the John Birch Society will help and even sometimes lead the American people to accomplish during the next 15 years. One, our first and most important specific undertaking should be to restore the complete independence of the United States. This includes our resolution to get us out of the United Nations and get the United Nations out of the United States. Two, we must once again make our money freely redeemable in gold at some realistic price. And we must take all practicable legislative steps to prevent a recurrence of the enormous thievery and other subversive crimes that have been perpetrated on the American people through a contrived inflation by every president from Franklin Roosevelt through Richard Nixon. Three, we should reduce the number of government bureaus, of government civilian employees, and the whole quantity of government by at least 50%. And we should achieve at least this much reduction in proper fashion through gradually convincing a majority of the American people of the wisdom of such a course. Four, we should withdraw all American troops from every spot on earth that is not American soil, except when and where such troops may be required as decided by Congress to protect American lives and property from criminal vandalism. Five, we should get government out of the areas and functions and activities where government does not belong. Again, all steps to this end should be taken gradually, but nevertheless just as rapidly as enough of the American people can be persuaded to support such progress. Any such achievement will require a truly massive educational force, but that's exactly what we hope to build during the next 15 years. We could go ahead for at least 100 numbered items, but the John Birch Society will undoubtedly be working on more than that many specific projects, which will be laid out in its bulletins before another 180 months will have rolled around. And all of these projects will fit into the general pattern indicated by the 5 major objectives listed above. So let's really wind up this marathon monologue with one final thought. None of us can guarantee anything about what the future will bring. Your speaker knows what a job we have before us to rid our country of the scourge of communism within the next few years, and then to go ahead on our constructive program so well that 15 years from now, we shall already be entering an era of far less government, of a much sounder sense of responsibility, and, with God's help, of a better world. But I sincerely believe that it can be done, and this much I know. If every man and woman in this audience should leave here tonight feeling in his or her own mind and heart that it can and must be done, then it surely will be. And so, all of you patriots of good character, good conscience, and noble ideals, whom we can reach with the filmed version of this speech in 1,000 other audiences, it is with a great deal of confidence and energizing will to win that we invite you to join us in our epic undertaking. While to all of you great, wonderful friends in this present audience, I certainly extend my very deep thanks indeed for so much patience and attention. Thank you and good night.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence proclaims God-given rights, and we intend to protect them. Working with people like you for over 50 years, preserving freedom and building a better tomorrow. safeguarding the Constitution by limiting government power. We are restoring liberties, educating voters, and leading the freedom movement. Join with us. United, we will defend our rights. We are all Americans. We are the John Birch Society.
All right, parents, listen up. We've all seen the countless examples of how radical leftists have been destroying American schools. It's no longer just about the terrible math and reading levels. Now, radical left teachers birthed from liberal universities are forcing gender indoctrination in kindergarten. They're teaching lessons on white guilt.
Freedom Project Academy has perfected live online learning over the course of a decade. I get a ton of great feedback about this program, a ton.
They're built on Judeo-Christian values, a classical curriculum. What does that mean? It means they're taught, your children are taught the way that the founding generations of the country. My own son Noah did Freedom Project Academy for several years when he was younger.
The more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board, and I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack, and because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.
Imprisonment, forced labor, permanent separation from my family, perhaps death. I knew what could happen to people who were caught trying to defect, but the watchtowers stood yards away. The possibility of a new life in a different world, one without tyranny, was within sight. The West. I thought of the rewards no longer crushed under the boot of communism. I would work and make money, no longer restrained by the chains of collectivism. I would say what I wanted, without fear of spies and informants nearby. I would be free. The frozen rain and Romanian mud sipped through my gloves and cloths. I fantasized about the fire burning in the wood stove of my parents' home, but I pushed those thoughts from my mind, closed my eyes, and waited for the cover of the darkness.
Get Defector, a true story of tyranny, liberty, and purpose by Mark Hobafkovich with Paul Dragu, a thrilling page-turner that will remind you how precious yet vulnerable freedom is. Available at shopjbs.org or Amazon. For a limited time, get 20% off your entire order using promo code Defector20 when you purchase Defector at shopjbs.org.
Hey, Tammy, it's wonderful to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to a lovely lady in Iowa, Tammy Kobza. She is a mover and a shaker and gets things done. And Tammy, we have a fight on our hands out there in our Corn Belt, don't we?
We sure do, unfortunately. They're coming after our food and our very private property and our lives, basically, our way of life.
And this sound, you know, when we're saying this, a scoffer might say, oh, they're crazy, they're nuts. No, we know that this is true because they spell it. We're just reporting what the left is saying about all of this because they've spelled it out for years, Agenda 21 and now Agenda 2030. This is Agenda 2030 in action. So let's break it down for our viewers. Talk about what's happening right there in Iowa, how the land is, that private companies are coming in trying to declare eminent domain for their own profit-making purposes and take land away from United States farmers.
They sure are. About a year and a half ago, we started reading about this whole carbon capture pipeline and sequestration process coming through thousands of miles of Iowa, and it also goes through South Dakota, North Dakota, and eastern Nebraska, Minnesota, and into Illinois. And basically what was happening is they thought they would go at each ethanol plant, and because CO2 was deemed a pollutant by Obama's EPA director in 2009, otherwise we all know it's the gas of life, because it was deemed a pollutant, they were going to capture this pollutant coming from the ethanol plants and pump it underground thousands of miles and then sequester it, places in Illinois, one in North Dakota, a mile or so under the ground forever. so that it would not harm the environment. And as people got wind of that, basically what happened is they said, there is no way we're letting you come through our land to bury this pipeline. We are going to stop you. And they have been trying to force farmers into giving up a little bit of their land with an easement signing. Farmers are not cooperating with that, because they know that once they sign that easement, they've pretty much lost the use of their land for more than just that easement use. They've looked at the easement agreements. These companies, Summit Carbon Solutions, Navigator, Heartland Greenway, and Wolf ADM, the three that are in Iowa, are able, well, we've seen the Summit easement. They're able to sell that land, that easement, whenever they want to, should they go under.
Well, and digging up that topsoil is also so destructive of the farmland. Even if they decided, oh, we're not going to do this after all. Now that they've dug up the topsoil, you can't use it as farmland. Plus, they've trenched up the tile, the irrigation tile underneath, which means you're right, you've destroyed that as useful farmland. So it's not something that you can just come back and, oh, let them lay the pipeline and then you can plant your crops over that. It's not like that.
It isn't like that. And they've learned that the hard way through some other pipelines that are a public utility, natural gas and that, because these pipeline companies don't seem to know much about soil science. And so they just dump the land and then they just dump it back in, and it doesn't ever produce the way the Lord laid that land structure out, that soil out. And so basically they're saying no, but this is a bigger thing, because this is not a public utility. This is a scam. There is no such thing. This is all done under the guise of man-made climate change. And there is nothing man-made about climate change. And we all know that. We know that CO2 is the gas of life. We need it. We're in short supply, actually, of it for things like growing plants, dry ice, welding, fire extinguishers need it. And then the other big issue is that when CO2, ambient CO2, is highly pressurized at between 1200 and 1600 psi, what happens when that ruptures was witnessed in Satartia, Mississippi. CO2, when it's pressurized, is heavier than air. It displaces oxygen all over, depending on where the wind is, the temperature, etc. And people were deadly ill. Fortunately, no one died, but that was just a shorter pipeline. And so people are also being very concerned about their lives. And they've asked their insurance agent, hey, if this ruptured on my property and that heavy CO2 eked over into my neighbor, let's say it killed hogs in a confinement building, will you cover me? And the insurance agents are going, no way. So it is a scam. It's not a public utility. And the harsh thing is, we're paying for it with our tax dollars through the infrastructure bill. And so we're paying dollars. Yes. And so the men like Terry Branstad, former Governor Terry Branstad, Bruce Rastetter, Larry Fink with BlackRock, these men are all going to profit in a huge way, both coming and going. They're telling these men and women that they're going to basically give you this money for the easements. That's our taxpayer money. They're not writing it out of their own savings account. So there are all sorts of issues. People are no longer as threatened by the these surveyors and the people that are coming at them. They're suing them for trespassing and that sort of thing. But what we're fighting is the administrative state, the Iowa Utility Board, the Public Utility Commission in South Dakota. 3 people are making a decision about the use of land. It's unconscionable. It's unconstitutional. The upside of this, Rebecca, is that people are learning about the administrative state, what a real republic is. They're learning true science. They're learning a bunch of things that are probably long overdue, and they're learning that they need to get involved in their own civic arena. They need to protect their God-given rights.
Amen. And that is precisely why this is, of course, this is affecting that Corn Belt, but this affects people in Maine, down to Florida, out in California. This affects all of us because this has to do with our private property rights. The United Nations has already declared that private ownership of property contributes to social injustice because it makes people unequal. Right? So that's how they're going at this. And if you think that's crazy, just remember they're convincing children in schools that they can choose their gender now. Anything can go. This isn't just conspiracy theory, pie in the sky, tinfoil hat wearing, nonsense. This is real. This is and it's happening to these farmers. If they can do it to them, they can do it to you. And that's why it is so very important for us to get this word out. Tammy, we're getting close to out of time. We've got a couple of minutes left here. I want to get your closing thoughts about telling people how they can get involved in helping these farmers right now. But also, I want to encourage you. I'd like to have some farmers on the show as well and actually talk about what they're going through. So, but anyway, take it away.
We'll get those. Rebecca, thank you for this platform that we can get the word out. People need to go to jbs.org and they need to join. You can find your coordinator and click on that. Please join, because when we join together in small chapters like what we have, we are a formidable force because real Americans are stepping up. So please go to jbs.org. You'll see a little tab there that says Stop Agenda 2030. That's what this is. We need to get people to understand they need to tell their federal officials in Congress and DC, get us out of the United Nations. This is all.
That's the nice thing about the John Birch Society. We are not really a top center organization. It is an organization based on chapters all over the United States of America. So if somebody from Iowa contacts JBS, they're actually contacting you. You're their neighbor. You're the one that they're going to talk with, and you get to know each other and you all work together, and it's very small local chapters that work on these action projects together. I know the farmers are very, very grateful to JBS. What have some of them said?
They are just grateful to, first of all, learn who's behind this. The United Nations, and they're also grateful to know this is what we help give them marching orders to talk to their city council, their county supervisors, and their state legislators. And we tell them this is what's going on. We have a wonderful state legislator, five bills right now that in Iowa you can support to stop this.
Fantastic. We do. Lots of times people feel like they're shackled, like they don't know what to do. We have the tools. We just need the pullers at the oars to get the work done. Absolutely. Right. Tammy, thank you so much. I want to have you on again very, very soon and get updates about this. And hopefully we see victories along the way.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll see you tomorrow on The New American TV.
Hello, I'm Brandon Howe.
Well, this is Rebecca Terrell again with The New American TV, just wanting to sign off and let you know that was an interview that I conducted, obviously, a couple of days ago with Tammy Kobza out in Iowa. We do need everybody's help combating these underground pipelines that they're putting in to take CO2 from industrial locations to pump it into the ground, deep underneath ground, as if carbon dioxide is an evil thing. We're covering these issues and so many more at thenewamerican.com. I urge you to visit us there, visit us at jbs.org, learn more. We have the tools there to fight this. We need your help. And with God's help, also, we'll make it a better world. We'll see you tomorrow.
And thank you for watching